Hi, and welcome to Finding Your Way Through Therapy. The goal of this podcast is to demystify therapy, what can happen in therapy, and the wide array of conversations you can have in and about therapy. Through personal experiences, guests will talk about therapy, their experiences with it, and how psychology and therapy are present in many places in their lives. With lots of authenticity and a touch of humor, here is your host, Steve Bisson.
Thank you and welcome to episode 99. There is one single episode left. Well, actually more than that. I'll explain a little later. Before my 100th episode, never thought I'd get there. Just a privilege and very honored. But if you haven't listened to episode 98, it's Gordon Brewer. We talk about the PsychCraft Network, among other things. I am now part of the PsychCraft Network. I hope you go listen to Gordon's podcast. Among others, obviously, there's a bunch of them. There's Kim, there's Lisa, and many others that I'm forgetting right now, but guys, don't hurt me. I'm just trying to remember them by heart. But episode 99 will be with a former supervisor of mine. Not only a former supervisor, she actually is the one who hired me for the crisis team in 1999. Yes, I am that old. But her hiring of me really changed my career in many good ways. We had a great relationship while we worked together, and I am truly happy that she came on. We're going to talk about different things. I'm pretty sure we're going to talk about the Bulldogs, but let me give you a little bit of her biography, which is Sarah Cloud received her master's in social work from Boston College School of Social Work in 1996 and master's of business administration from Isenberg School of Management in 2018 at UMass. During her career, she's been recognized for her leadership and received awards to improve treatment for Latino and Brazilian communities, as well as suicide prevention for the elders, the opioid epidemic, and community justice. She specializes in the development of innovative programs and interagency partnerships, which she's really good at. Sarah serves as a board member of the Boston Bulldogs, I mentioned earlier, a wellness community for people in recovery affected by addiction and treatment, and PCO Hope, a drop-in center provides a safe gateway to substance use information, resources, support, and hope for individuals and their loved ones. Sarah has been the director of social work at Beth Israel Deaconess-Plymouth since 2015 and is also a published author of children's books on grief and loss related to the opioid epidemic. We recently reconnected on the writing of a book because we both did that and just enjoyed talking to Sarah. Hadn't talked to her in a long time, and I hope you enjoyed the interview. Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 99. Yes, this is the episode before the big 100th week, and I can't wait to share that with you. But right now, I have someone who has had an influence in my career since 1999, even though I think we were talking and we haven't spoken in a few years now, but we're still close. I consider Sarah someone who is very important. She brought me into a crisis team. She made me do my first eval almost right away. I don't know if she remembers that, but I certainly do. And she really just gave me an opportunity to be the therapist and the counselor and the crisis clinician and frankly, the person that I am. And Sarah has been there for me on several levels, including when I lost my grandmother, when I had a miscarriage with my ex-wife. She was very much a support and a person that I consider not only, she was my supervisor, I consider her our colleague, and today I consider her a friend. So I want to say hi to Sarah Cloud. Hi, Sarah.
It is such a pleasure to be here and an honor, and it's wonderful to reconnect. You have a much better memory than I, but we do go way back.
Well, I made it up. No, I'm kidding. Of course not. I even remember when you first started, you introduced me to Greg Weilman, and if Greg's listening, hi. And I always remembered how you guys were kind of like, you had that instinct thing about a crisis team that had no clue. And I felt like I'm overwhelmed. I can't do this. And I turned out okay, I believe anyway, as a clinician. So, and Sarah really helped me with that.
Fantastic.
So I really appreciate you being on, Sarah. And it's interesting. I've known you for a long time, but obviously I know you in my way. But I would love you to introduce yourself to my audience as whatever you want to be, you, so to speak.
Great. Thank you. I really appreciate that. So I have been in the field for a little over 30 years. I think you might kind of mentioned how far back you and I go. I have a master's in social work from Boston College. Dates back to 1992, so I'm dating myself. And later went on, as much as I absolutely love the clinical work and I continue to be very involved, regularly, both managing and developing clinical programs and supervising a clinical team, and actually continuing to, my love is still emergency room work or crisis intervention. So I still continue to keep my hands involved in it, and I still do some clinical work as well. I also have a great interest in the business aspect. So I went back and graduated with a master's in business administration from the Isenberg School of Management in 2018. So it's really nice to be able to wear those two hats and have that perspective in the work that I do. And I also very much believe in working with community partners and giving back. And so from that lens, I am involved on a number of steering committees and boards. And the ones that I think that are most dear, they all are, but most dear to my heart, are the Boston Bulldog Running Club. They're a wellness community for folks in recovery or considering whether they should be or thinking about recovery, as well as people impacted by addiction. So we have first responders, police officers, family members, and other folks involved in this wellness community. So I'm very proud to say that we have 17 Boston Bulldog members running in the marathon.
17.
Today, right?
Yes, 17.
Yeah.
That's awesome. The Boston Marathon
is really hard and trained hard and a lot of mentorship. And so very, very proud of my Boston Bulldog Running Club. And there's a couple of other ones that are really near and dear to my heart as well, as within PCO Hope. We do a lot of outreach into the community, distribution of Narcan, treatment scholarships, because Steve, as you know, and as probably a lot of folks that are listening know, insurance tends to only pay for detox and maybe a step down after that. But we know that the recovery process needs a lot more support and treatment well beyond that short period of time. So getting into sober living situations, sober housing is such an important step for so many folks, particularly if they've tried treatment a number of times. They just miss that piece of continuation and support and so, and sober living and support. So we do treatment scholarships for them as well. So, so just some of the things that we're involved with.
And with the community, what community in particular you're talking about here, just so that the audience knows? Because I know, but.
That is a great question. So a lot of my work has been focused in Plymouth County. Believe it or not, but the Boston Bulldog, Plymouth County, Massachusetts. And the Boston Bulldogs we've got chapters throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And for a period, we had a chapter in Chicago.
Oh, wow.
So we've been largely based here in Massachusetts for that organization.
And I hope I'm able to link that in the show notes for the Boston Bulldog Running Club, because I think that's important stuff. I've known you for a long time. I know how passionate you are about that. And I certainly remember even the work we've done. I remember a time when we worked together and you sent me to an opioid overdose prevention program in Worcester, Mass, when it was not popular to talk about Narcan, when it wasn't popular to talk about treatment. And I'll always remember that you gave me that great opportunity. And I know that that's also very important to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think carrying Narcan and knowing how to administer it, which is so easy, is the same as knowing how to perform CPR. You probably will never need to use it, but when you do, it's life-saving.
And Narcan, for those of you who don't know, is for a reversal of an opioid or opiate overdose, because those are two different things. And I could go on and on about that, but I'm going to save a little time here and you can look it up. But I think that what happens when you work in this field, especially with the substance use and all that, you start looking at your experience. And I know I have my 25 or so years in the field and you have 30. And there's certainly different settings, different things that happens, but there's also barriers. And what do you think would be the biggest barrier for people seeking treatment at this time?
Yeah, I think for behavioral health, seeking treatment for behavioral health, which is mental health as well as substance use disorders, I think it's stigma. It's stigma and misinformation that's out there really stops a lot of us, I think, from seeking treatment. It causes a great deal of shame, which is so debilitating and keeps us very isolated and alone. And I think also behavioral health disorders should be compared to and thought of and talked about very much the same way as any other medical disorder or medical diagnosis. So, for example, if someone told you, you get stage 2 cancer, and we know that these are the things that are effective, they're proven, to improving your chances and your prognosis and putting you into remission if you did it, very few people would say, no, I'm not going to do that. But the number of folks, when we say you've got a substance use disorder or an alcohol use disorder, we're concerned. Here are proven ways, and here's a menu of treatment options that we know could be very effective for you. It's a menu you can choose from. We can mix and match. We can put it together. The majority of the folks, at least the first 1 or 2 times around, say, no, I can do this on my own. And we would never say, no, I can treat cancer on my own. I mean, yeah, so maybe some people might and go to acupuncture and herbal medicines and things like that. But people, when talk with about alcohol use disorder in particular, is such a significant, it far outshadows the opiate epidemic, which we know is significant. A lot of people say, no, I can do this on my own. I can cut back. I don't need treatment. It's really viewed as a character flaw. And it's not a character flaw.
And I think
it's a medical diagnosis that needs medical treatment.
And I think that that's what happens is that if you tell someone they have cancer, there's no shame into seeking treatment, whether it's stage 1 to stage 4. It doesn't matter. People can go treatment, including, like you said, alternative methods of treatment. When we talk about substance use, the shame is so heavy on that person, the family, and then and I'm maybe putting my fellow medical staff on notice here, but sometimes even medical staff kind of shame them. We really need to fight the stigma, not only by the community, but do you think that sometimes we also have a medical kind of like view of substance use in general that's probably also needs to be addressed?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the best things that I ever think that happened to both the mental health and substance use treatment world and medical world is people with lived experience who have succeeded and they're in remission and what has worked for them, working side by side with nurses and social workers and medical staff has been an absolute game changer. So, working in the emergency room, I, have recovery coaches, recovery navigators that are in long-term recovery. And it is just a tremendous culture shift and thought process for the medical staff to see that how greatly this disease impacts people, even like what they would consider normal looking people. They only see people at their absolute worst, at their absolute lowest points. They don't get to see the recovery and the hope and the healing and the tremendous success stories about how people are able to rebuild their lives and reclaim their lives. And so giving them some of that, the medical world, some of that through the recovery coaches has really made a significant shift in how they think about and how they approach and how they talk to and how they talk about people with that are living with alcohol use disorders or substance use disorders.
I think lived experience is key, in my opinion. And, not that people who haven't had lived experience can't contribute. I think that's important to remember too, because I've said this before, and I learned this when we worked together. Someone had told me, well, you don't know how to work with someone with kids because you don't have any kids. And I said, well, I've never had schizophrenia. Somehow I figured out how to help people who have those diagnoses. I think lived experience helps and it brings to another level what we can do. But if you could tell me more about recovery coaches, because I don't think everyone knows what a recovery coach does. I think that they imagine someone with a whistle and a hat going, go, go, go. So maybe we need to talk about what that means.
They do go. They do support someone saying go, 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 but in a very different way. So they are people often with lived experience, either in recovery themselves. Sometimes I've also seen family members who've been affected by addiction. So they have that personal experience with the disease and they go through a certification process, extensive training process that includes ethics as well as, many other types of courses and topics. And they become certified in the state of Massachusetts. And then they work in a number of different settings. They're out in the community, they're at detox facilities, they're at other treatment type facilities. We have them here in many of the emergency rooms in the state of Massachusetts, up on med surg floors, critical care, helping work, engage people that are living with substance use disorders very often in the early stages or in the throes the height of their disease process and encouraging them to seek treatment, linking them to treatment, helping them navigate the options that are available, all options, whether it be a wellness community like the Boston Bulldog Running Club, whether it be AA. There's so many different avenues to recovery, and it's not one size fits all. There's medications that can help with recovery. So it's really understanding all of those options and helping individuals sort through which ones they think might fit best for where they are in their life and what their belief system is, and then connecting them. And they're really also about offering hope.
And I think you mentioned another important part is medication. I think that in the past, and this is old school AA, and unfortunately we still see it sometimes, that say, well, if you take medication, you're just chewing your drug. I feel that there's been a significant shift in the AA community, but I think where our medical community has also shifted as a way to help. I'll share a personal story here. I had a friend of mine who had 7 years sobriety and called me up and had relapse almost chronically for the last month or so. Not too recently, but recently. And there was even a stigma from that person's part in regards to medication. I think that the shift in medication, we need to start using it because it can be effective for individuals with substance use issues.
Yeah, I really think nothing should be off the table. What works for one person may not work for the next person. That is not unlike any other disease process. We're always adjusting the treatment plans, trying different things. Anything should be on the table for us to explore, because the alternative is also so dangerous and damaging. The reoccurrences, particularly around the opiate epidemic, one reoccurrence or relapse could be deadly. And so we really need to be invested in whatever works and helping people move up through that process.
And I would also say not only in Massachusetts, but across the country in the last 10 to 15 years, we've shifted. It's a dem problem, people who have substance use issues, to knowing that we all know someone with a substance use issue in some way, shape, or form, whether it's a family, a neighbor, a friend, colleague, thing that has shifted significantly. Do you think that also working with the families to lift that stigma? Because I've seen that many times in my treatment, that the families kind of like are either desperate to get help or they're shaming them into help.
Yeah, I think families and support systems are really big factor in recovery, because nobody goes through the disease of addiction alone or in isolation. It's a family process. I think families often feel like they're to blame for mental health or substance use disorder, and that couldn't be further from the truth. So that's, I think, knocking that down and out as the number one thing. You are not to blame. You are not at fault. And they need support just as much. And they need to know that they're not alone just as much as the individual. So yeah, linking families to support is so helpful. And I think we are very fortunate to have in Massachusetts, and I think nationally, some phenomenal family supports. And if there's one silver lining in the COVID pandemic, is that a lot of things went virtual. And so now you can have a virtual meeting, family meeting. I mean, certainly in person, there's absolutely something to be said about it. But to try it out, at least virtually to start, there's phenomenal support groups for families. AA meetings went, all sorts of NA meetings, everything went virtual. So there's options. You don't have transportation, you don't have childcare. I mean, there's places to start. So it really helps remove a lot of those barriers.
I've been doing telehealth for about 8 years before it was cool in the pandemic. And I can't tell you how that has helped even people who struggle with going face to face, whether it's an anxiety issue, whether it's the shame of maybe even using, because I know that sometimes we have, as providers, we're told if someone is high or under the influence, we're not supposed to see him. In fact, my personal experience is that that's a rich set of data in order to see where the person is at when they are actually using. I don't know if you agree with that. I don't know what your thoughts are around that.
I think any opportunity to engage as opposed to push away or push down, or, and I know that's not what you're saying, but there's a sense of rejection, right? If you say if you cancel an appointment, you don't see somebody. So I think the more we have to be with them during this point in their disease process, I think it will only help in the long run.
I think that that's why, for me, I always remember that two of my biggest success stories in my private practice are people who were actually under the influence while I was talking to them. And I did a lot of the motivational interviewing stuff. And both of them, as of this is in the last 7 years or so, both of them, knock on wood, sober, doing well. I get messages from them here and there. And that's why I think it's important to just meet a person where they're at versus trying to tell them where they should be. Is that a little bit of what you're talking about, like seeking the treatment a proper way? Like, because I think that what we tend to do is we tell them, here's the box, and you got to follow that box. Do you think that there's a better way to seek treatment?
Yeah, no, I think that you've outlined it really nicely. I think we're always trying, whether it's mental health challenges or substance use, we're always saying, here's what's available to you. And if you don't, you have to fit into it. If you don't like it, that's too bad. That's kind of what we have to offer. And I think the more we can be flexible and engaging and give as much as we can and help folks navigate the resources, I think there's going to just be better outcomes. So I'm certainly not suggesting that I hate to use this word because I think it's a dirty word, would enable them, to enable them and, in X, Y, and Z. But I think that is not something that we do as professionals. And I don't think it's a word that I think it's a word that we would work on dropping from our vocabulary. It's really about engaging the individual and doing what we can to help them navigate and motivate and link to what they will ultimately be the best treatment for them.
And I think that I go back to a little bit of our relationship and how much you emphasize the respect of the individual, whether we were working in an emergency room. I know that you weren't technically in charge of me with outpatient, but technically you were, and we had great conversations in regards to that. I also go back to something that people tend to do in the medical field. Someone chronically relapses. I still don't like that word, but I'll use it anyway. And then they see them in the ER 7, 8, 9 times and they get discouraged. How do we keep people from being discouraged and getting them the resources?
Yeah. So those are the folks that we refer to often here at the hospital and working as familiar faces. So again, another dirty word, in my opinion, is frequent flyers.
Yes.
It's just the meaning. So anyways, so the folks that are familiar faces, I think can be very challenging. As healthcare providers, we went into this field to help people, right?
Right.
And a lot of the time when we can't help somebody because we don't know what else to do or how else to help, as evidenced by them continuing to come back over and over and over again, we start to feel helpless and hopeless, and we don't feel good about ourselves. And I think a lot of it, we then put that onto that individual and become frustrated with them. So I think as much as possible when in those types of situations, I try to change up the team a little bit. Who's going in to work with them? Maybe a fresh face from our, recovery navigator, maybe a clinician. We kind of just trade off a little bit because somebody going in frustrated, and it's completely understandable. I am human. I get there as well, but that's picked up on, and that's not always really super helpful to feel that way, because I don't think you can make anyone who's in the throes of addiction feel any worse about themselves than they already do. So we don't need to shame or add to that by any means. I think small wins are important in the process of recovery. So someone will even maybe they can agree to stop drinking hard alcohol and only drink beer. There's just these small pieces that kind of help us move along the process. I wouldn't take that strategy for, the majority of folks in terms of a clinical approach, but I think for some people that's where it is, and that's where we start. And that is, I think, something that they should feel really good about it as well.
There's so many things that came up to me. The first thing I'm going to say is what I tell I've said it on the podcast, when people relapse or lapse, I call it, and it's not necessarily a relapse all the time. To me, a lapse can exist also. And when they come in and they tell me about it, I say, thank you so much. What are we going to do about it? Let's work together. And they usually are surprised because usually the treaters have told them like what's wrong with and they kind of like feel shame. And I said, well, there's nothing I can say that you haven't said 10 times worse in your head. So it doesn't matter what I say. So I want to help you instead of just feeding the machine, so to speak. And I think that that's very important to talk about with people. And the other thing too is I'll always remember, I want to share this story too, because again, I want to show the impact that you've had. And this is the type of person you are. I remember a time where I was frustrated with a particular client who was coming back due to relapse on a regular basis at the emergency room. And one day you're like, instead of forcing yourself to go, Steve, why don't we send someone else? Maybe they need a fresh start. And I'll always remember that. I want to say this is about 15 years ago. It's not yesterday, but it's also important to have people go in and look at it from fresh eyes, because sometimes that can be the saving grace of human beings.
For both that individual and ourselves as treatment providers.
Well, I also think about transference, right? Because we're therapists, but we're humans and we have some transference, countertransference, and all that. Brings me a question I ask everyone. I usually ask at the beginning, but here we are now. Have you ever been in therapy?
Yes, I think that's a great question. And I'm glad that you asked it. And the answer is absolutely. I certainly practice what I preach, so to speak. I found myself, as many people did, I think, during the height of the pandemic. I was working at a hospital setting. I was coming in every day on site. I was watching some pretty horrible impact from COVID, particularly prior to the vaccinations, and then supporting the staff that were working doing heroic things, the medical providers and my own team here, and then all the people that are coming in for services without visitors, without their loved ones, because of the health concerns and the visitation being paused. And it was just a lot of different layers of really difficult and challenging work. And that was a time where I absolutely needed therapy. I absolutely needed to be processing this and taking care of myself so I can also take care of others. And I wouldn't have been able to do it without telehealth. We hadn't shifted to telehealth. I would not have been able to leave work on time, fit it in, physically get to someplace. So to be able to take a lunch break and be able to have my session with my therapist was a saving grace. So it's really nice to be able to continue after the pandemic has settled quite significantly, to be able to have the option of both in-person and telehealth for so many providers. So that was my most recent experience in therapy.
So you've been in therapy before that even, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I think that therapy is such a saving grace for myself. And I'm going to share this because it's important. At one point I was like, well, I'm a therapist. I don't have to go to therapy. I know how to handle this stuff. And clearly after a couple of years, I realized I can't handle this myself. I think that we talk about stigma a lot, and that's what I like about our conversations, Sarah. How about we lift a little bit of the stigma even for other professionals to reach out for help? Because I think it's hard for people to do that, including other medical professionals, whether it's doctors, whether it's nurses, everyone else. I'm not trying to forget anyone here by any stretch, but how do we lift that stigma for them?
A really great question. It's so hard. I don't know what your experience has been like, Steve, but looking at or thinking about who I'm going to see for therapy was really challenging, because I have all the people that I would want to refer myself to. I have a professional relationship with. So I think It puts me in a fortunate position in order to be able to refer loved ones and friends to a really great therapist, but it makes us kind of leaves me a little floundering for myself a bit. But I don't know what your experience was, what that was, but.
I actually see a lot of medical professionals besides first responders, which is my two passions, but they're usually not at all from my region, because they're like, oh no, I know Steve, or I know of Steve and all that. So it's always nice to have that. But I think that lifting that opportunity for everyone is also important, because I don't know about you. Well, maybe you do, but I don't have all the answers. I certainly know I don't. And I think that medical professionals sometimes go in and thinking that we need to know all the answers. And I think I tell people, you know what? I'm a human being. I don't know everything.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the work that we do is really focused on knowing what to do and having that background and education, but that doesn't make us any less in need of or benefit from therapy.
And I think it's hard to tell people to go and get therapy sometimes in the medical profession, not only because they know people. I think there's a stigma associated with that. And it's really finding with telehealth, I see medical professionals from all over the state except where I am. And I think that that's helpful. And I actually see people from other states as a coaching type of situation. And I think we have that opportunity. I think that we need to tell our medical professionals that, guess what? There's going to be someone, if you live in Springfield, blank state, because there's Springfield in 39 states or something, then there's got to be someone far from that area that you can see and talk to.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I especially, not to always keep bringing it back to the pandemic, but it's going to take us a long time to recover from, particularly medical providers, I think, and everybody. I shouldn't single that out. It's left quite a mark. And so if now more than ever, we certainly need taking good care of ourselves, and that includes going to therapy.
Well, I don't see you excluding anyone when you said that. I think that we're on the subject of medical professionals, and I think that they saw a lot of hard stuff. I have a lot of medical doctors who told me that, like, seeing someone pass away and I'm the last one to hold their hand, and they didn't really know me until about a few hours before that. That's a big burden to carry.
It is. And I know that they have a lot of experience with death and dying. And we saw particularly in the hospital setting and the acute care setting, rates of death that far exceeded what I think have been used to, at least in a community hospital here in the South Shore of Boston, rates that were pretty significant.
And I would say that I've worked with rural doctors, and I know a few doctors and nurses in particular in the Boston area, and their numbers were also staggering and very hard to comprehend at times. So yeah. I don't think it's just like any type of, I think it's every site. And I think that I think what we've seen, and, maybe we can switch a little bit to this. I think what happens in the medical field in particular, we get burnt out. And the first person to ever call me out on my burnout in therapy is the person we're talking to right now, Sarah. And I really can't tell you how much I appreciated that, because originally I was angry. No, I can handle this. No, I can handle this. And you said the words, I'm not questioning if you can handle this, but I want you to handle your own life first. And I'll always remember that you said that. And I think that we need to work on that problem too, because with the burnout that we've just got rid of a lot of nurses and doctors who just can't take it, and frankly, therapists and clinicians. How do we address the burnout in this type of field, especially when you see we talked about the COVID and the pandemic, the opiate overdose crisis, in my opinion, is still going. And across the country, we have other issues, including increased financial stressors, homicides, suicides. How do we help people just get to a point where we're not just like giving, they need to not burn out and give them the time they need? I know you work in a hospital now, so how do you do that?
I wish I had the answers for that. I do have thoughts about directions. I think the demand is so high right now, and it's coming from every angle. It is incredibly difficult work. I think it was incredibly difficult work prior to the pandemic, and now it feels impossible some days. But I know that we have our foundation that we can always go back to. And that foundation is looking at our lifestyle. It is getting outside in some way, shape, or form to reset. It's about connection to others. It is about trying to eat. I know I fail on this all the time, but it's about eating well. It's about getting enough sleep. It's about everything in moderation. So if you're not in recovery, or don't feel like you have a problem with alcohol or that's gambling, there's all sorts of other challenges. But if you take care of all of that in moderation and you set that foundation of wellness, it makes it a little bit easier every day to then go into work and be faced with the challenges. And I think when we have things going on in our personal lives that are very demanding or hard, and we all do, we're human. And then you balance that, and then you add to that with what's going on at work. And then you take away that foundation of wellness around, because it's really hard to sleep when you're stressed, or maybe you're trying to deal with the stress and you had a little too much to drink, and you think that helps you sleep, but it actually doesn't. It interrupts your sleep pattern. And so all these things can really just very, very quickly get out of control and leave us feeling like even more stressed. So I think the more we can go back to the basics that we know that work for us, reset us and put that foundation. And that foundation is we move our bodies, we get outside, or we go to the gym, we meditate, like whatever it is for you that resets yourself. For me, I used to be running with the Boston Bulldogs Running Club, and I'm still very much involved and on the board and support of them, but I've shifted to tennis. Tennis is getting out in the court is my way to physically reset. So I think having something that helps you physically reset is incredibly important in surviving and thriving and not getting burnt out.
I was at a training recently, and it was the immune system and mental health, how it's related. And I really liked that training. The two things that they mentioned that is consistent throughout most research. You talked about exercise, which is very important, but social interactions. People who have social interactions, they're more likely to survive even a stage 4 cancer than the ones who isolate. I'm not going to go into Harlow's monkey too long, but that's the study that if you want to go back and looking at it, it's a mother that was made of metal and one made of like cloth. And the monkey would always go to the cloth one, even if it was hungry, because it was more comforting than a metal mom. But go look it up. I'm giving you the big points here. But I think that you talk about doing exercise and being with the Bulldogs. I would add that you have that social aspect that comes from that. That probably is a great benefit, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. That is one of the primary focuses of the Boston Bulldogs Running Club is that social connection, and that alone we suffer, but together we thrive, and being part of a community. So it's really the physical piece of it's super important. I don't want to downplay that, and I don't want to upset any of my Boston Bulldog colleagues and peers and friends, but that connection, the community is so important aspect of it. And I think that is one of the reasons why the pandemic has left such a significant mark on our lives, and is because we're so isolated. For our survival, for our physical health, we were so isolated, and that really impacted our mental health. And then there's that mind-body connection, so also our physical health. I think we saw rates of dementia skyrocket. We saw rates of alcohol use disorder skyrocket, depression, suicide, every aspect of our life. We saw a significant increase because the isolation. I mean, we know alcohol use disorder is a progressive disease. It's progressive disease like most cancers. Most cancers start at one part of your body. They start slow. Some are slower types of cancer than other types of cancer. Some are more aggressive. That's really not unlike alcohol use disorder. A lot of folks isolated, home alone during the pandemic, bored. What else are we going to do? Stressed. What else are we going to do? Let's have a couple beers or a couple glasses of wine or whatever it was. And over time, it crept up on so many people. And it does. It's a sneaky, progressive disease. And before you know it, I've gained a lot of weight, or my spouse is saying I have concerns, you really need to cut back. So it really, particularly, I think the pandemic really fast-tracked a lot of these diseases that we know is progressive, and we need to kind of get back together as a society in support of each other, back to that foundation of wellness and taking care of ourselves. And I think one of the things that was really surprising to me, even as a healthcare provider, was the number of folks in the community. And it's not just the community I work with. I've spoken to so many other professionals. They were not aware of the impact and the dangers of alcohol withdrawal. So if you
100%.
regularly, even let's just say not just, but if a bottle of wine a night or half a bottle of wine a night consistently for long periods of time, you're going to experience withdrawal symptoms. And it's one of the few substances that you can actually die from through seizures. So people come in often thinking they're having a heart attack, and I'm glad they came in. They're having a severe panic attack. I'm glad they're coming in to the emergency room. They're actually in alcohol withdrawals and had no idea that was even possible based on the amount they're drinking, whether their bodies would physically react to that. So I think there's been a lot of, again, that goes back to the misinformation. What is one of the greatest barriers, you said, to seeking treatment is misinformation, stigma. So not understanding and being well educated. And how would you be educated on that? Who would know that? And so I think it's just really important to get that information out as well, and again, still also address the stigma.
I agree 100%. I would also add that during pandemic, we all turned to social media. And one of my biggest pet peeves during the pandemic is that it was 1 o'clock or it's 5 o'clock somewhere. And it became such a acceptable thing to drink. And oh, we're doing meetings online. I don't have to let them know what's in my coffee, right? Because it's not real coffee.
I saw those all the time too.
And I'm like, you're screwing yourself over, right? And I think that that's part of what happened too. I don't know what you think about that, but
I agree. And it's, social media, it's, mainstream media. I mean, everybody, it's so socially acceptable to drink. It's actually a little bit more awkward. What's wrong with you? Why are you saying no? It's much harder. And I hope we all can do better if a friend says to us, no, thank you, I'll have some water, that we respect that. We don't need to question that. We'd never do the opposite, like, why are you having a drink? But we do ask, why are you not having a drink? So let it be. I think there's some really cool movements underway, though. There's a lot of really great social media pages on recovery now. That's
right.
really, really inspiring and successful success stories. The other great thing that's happening right now is people are taking a break. They're taking like a 2-week challenge, taking a break to see how it goes for them. And a lot of people are realizing, I had no idea how much alcohol use, even though I maybe wasn't drinking a lot, maybe I was just having 2 glasses of wine with dinner, really impacted their lives and how much better they sleep and how much the weight came off and how much clearer they thought. And so these are folks that maybe you and I, Steve, as professionals, wouldn't have diagnosed with them or even had any concern about an alcohol use disorder. But once they removed what they were using from their lives for a couple of weeks just to take a break, they're like, wow, I feel so much better. So I know there's a lot of podcasts and people talking about that have been really great and educational. So just hitting pause for a couple of weeks to see how it goes for you, even if you don't think you have a problem, because you probably don't, that's fine. It can be really helpful and eye-opening for all of us.
I agree wholeheartedly. And I think that talked about a few things here that I really want to hit. If you go somewhere and someone says, I don't want to drink, or I don't want to, I'll get a Pepsi, I'll get a water, I'll get a soda, I'll get whatever they get. I think that we need to learn to be, oh, okay. And not really ask why, because I think that why question is like, if someone's having water and someone's having, fuzzy water, they go, why are you having fuzzy water? No, we don't say that. We just let them be. And I think we got to learn how to let be of people. And, I think you're right. We have a lot of colleagues, friends that we would never have suspected of that. I certainly have been open with most people not knowing how bad it was for me too years ago. And nowadays I'm very happy to say that I don't have that problem anymore, but I'm like one situation away from getting back onto it. And I'm not afraid to say that. I think we need to change the perception that it's only blank people who have that. And I don't like the word people, but that's how we perceive it. And we need to change that.
I think that's one reason why I'm so impressed with the recovery movement around recovery navigators and recovery coaches, because those are folks that are recovering out loud. And I think the more people, it's a personal choice, and I would never push somebody or out somebody that's in recovery. That's their position, and that's their choice to do that. But I think the more people who recover out loud, it will make a significant impact. And I see a lot of folks, celebrities, saying that they're in recovery and they don't drink anymore and they're being highlighted. And I think that helps really influence other folks that how could somebody that successful have had a problem with alcohol use or substance or whatever it is, and continue to be so successful and doing so well in recovery. And I think the more we can really support people in recovering out loud, I think the better it will be for everybody.
I think that there's also, I don't know which agency I saw it on, but they were talking about sober weddings that have been going on for 6 months to a year where there's no alcohol served at the reception afterwards. And I think that's a brilliant idea. Yeah. I think that it's something that I really admire personally. And I think it's a good way to start thinking about it differently.
Yeah, I think a lot more restaurants are offering mocktails, which are kind of fun. And, you don't necessarily have to be the one to know that what you're drinking or not drinking. That's their business. It's never anyone else's. And there's been sober tailgating, which is cool too.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of really great things underway in our society. So we're we're very fortunate to see that coming, and we need a lot more of it.
Well, Sarah, it's always important for me to also bring up something else that me and you have in common is we're both published authors. I'm switching gears here because I can go on and on about substance use for hours. And I can thank you for that too. When I decide not to be at the work at a jail anymore, and you're like, "Oh, take this substance use thing at the parole office." I'm like, I don't know, Sarah. You kind of pushed me into that, and
I talked you into a lot of things.
I either it's a good thing or a bad thing. But knowing you for over 20 years, I really truly see the influence you've had on my career in a good way. And I say these things, and people are going to be like, "Oh, she forced me in a lot of things," but she never put me in a situation, to be clear, for me to fail. If she thought I was going to fail, she would send me some reinforcement. She would give me everything that she can in order for me to succeed. So just want to make sure that people don't think that like Sarah was like this, do this, do that. She never was that way. She did push me once in a while, but we all need a little pushing, right?
I saw your potential and where I thought might be a good fit from a distance. And I was always open to hearing otherwise, that it wasn't a good fit. There were some tough positions. You did amazing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I remember even when we worked on a contract in Worcester, Massachusetts for parole, and we started getting bigger and bigger in Worcester. And that was obviously, I would make contacts. We had a great vice president that was really amazing, Ken Bates, who also had a lot of contacts in Worcester. And Sarah and I and Ken would always like close these deals in Worcester. And we became a lot more important when we worked at that agency in Worcester. But I'm digressing here because I wanted to ask about your books, because I can say books now. I only have one, so I'm just a newbie, but tell me more about your books, because I really, obviously we connected on that subject a few years ago.
Yeah,
I want to hear more about it.
I am a self-published author. It's a children's book series on hope and loss of a parent to the opiate epidemic. And I never set out to be an author, let alone an author of children's books. But the more I looked, the more I asked, the more I networked, looking for elementary school age appropriate materials for children to help them with the loss, the more I realized that there was a huge void. I know it's a difficult topic, a huge void. I wasn't able to find anything that existed. And I was talking to Joanne Peterson. She's the founder of Learn to Cope. And so we were getting ready for a task force meeting, and I was talking to her. And if Joanne Peterson didn't know of a book like that existed, it just didn't exist. So at that point, I decided I was going to do my best to try to fill that void. And, another piece of this that was really important for me making this decision is I have been in remission from breast cancer for 14 years. And so I was young. I was in my mid to late 30s at the time of my diagnosis. I had two young children, two young girls, and that was really hard for them. And one of the things that really helped them get through that was some really great children's books and literatures on what to expect, and what was going on, and reassuring them. And so books at that age were really helpful to my family and my daughters getting through a very difficult health crisis. So I thought it was really important, meant a lot to me to have some books available to help children get through or try to begin to understand the loss of their parents, whether they may, it's complicated, they may have had a really good relationship, they may have spent a lot of time with them, or unfortunately, because of the disease of addiction, we know that the relationship can be not as consistent as I think the parent would want it to be, or the family would want it to be, because of the nature of the disease and the progression of the disease. So I felt it was really important to write something. So I did. And so the book series is called Mama Paca. So that's MAMAPACA. And I have a website, mamapaca.com, that helps introduce the topic of addiction to children, how to introduce the books, themes to reinforce throughout the books, and just in general, when talking about this disease process to young children. And also, as I learned and connected and found more books for children, I linked them there so that no one else has to kind of be struggling and looking for these books. So there is books linked there for children that are living with in their childhood NAS. So they've been born exposed or addicted to substances, opiates in particular, and what that's like and how that impacts their lives. There's children's books on that. There are children's books about a parent who hasn't passed away but are struggling or living with addiction. And then also for teenagers and young adults, there's a really great book, a graphic novel, what it was like to grow up having, I think in this particular case, a mom that was living with the disease of addiction. And that one's a very well-known author that other people are probably well aware of, called Hey Kiddo. But anytime I find a book, I link it to that website to have it all available in one location. And then very briefly after that, after the first book, Mama Pekka, My Heart Won't Let You Go. So it's about a little girl who loses her mom to addiction. I wrote a book about a little boy who loses his dad. And that book is particularly near to my heart because a Boston Bulldog Running Club leader, Sean Staunton, had been in recovery, I think, for almost 4 years, doing phenomenal, running marathons, and very much, again, a leader and somebody we absolutely looked up to in the Boston Bulldogs. He had a reoccurrence, and the reoccurrence was deadly. And he passed away, and it's going to be 2 years in June. So I teamed up with his brother and his sister, as well as his parents, to say, what do you want the world to know about Sean and how his disease progressed and started, and what avenues and outlets he had for recovery. I mean, 4 years is such a tremendous success. And wellness was a really big avenue for him. He tried so many different things. And wellness, and particularly the Boston Bulldog Running Club, was a very significant piece. And so in those 4 years and in recovery, he was able to heal many things, including relationships with his family, including a relationship with his son, his young son. And so a lot of wonderful things happened in recovery for him in connection with the wellness path. So we wanted to tell his story as well.
You know, my daughters read the first book. We haven't read the second book, and they really enjoyed it, and they gave high praise. I read it, high praise also. And I'll link your website to the show notes so that way people can go and visit it. The other thing, too, is I truly appreciate you sharing about surviving breast cancer. As you said earlier, you don't want to out people. I was hoping you'd bring that up because it's an important thing to talk about. But I wasn't going to out you because I have way too much respect for you.
Thank you. Yeah, no, very much. I think it was a very important and influential crisis in my life that led to so many wonderful things that we maybe don't need to talk about on your podcast, but it really significant changes, both in my personal life as well as my professional life and my focus. So thank you.
So yeah, I remember being there when you were going through that and just realizing how much, and not that there's anything wrong with where Sarah was prior. It had definitely changed her even better. So it's not like it was bad before, it just got even better. And like you said, we might not share a whole lot here, and that's maybe a private conversation for me and Sarah to know and no one else to know. But I truly saw it in you, and having that, I tell people I lived vicariously through you and a couple of other people we know from our agency we used to work at who had that. And I realized that it's so important to support people. And it's not about supporting. This is something I say constantly to people. It's not the first week. It's not the second week. It's the fourth week. It's the seventh week, because this is not a battle of a day or two. It's a battle that is consistent. I know my friend who recently, and hopefully at this point is done with his surgeries, has now survived colorectal cancer. And he was like, you were the only one consistently checking in with me. And I'm like, yes, because I live vicariously through a few people.
Yeah, it's a long haul. It's a marathon. It's not a quick and easy done. And it's something that we always continue. And again, it brings me back to, I don't want to belabor the point, but my recovery and in remission for breast cancer is a lifelong. I'm done with chemo, I'm done with radiation. It doesn't mean that I don't need to pay attention to it. Doesn't mean that I need to not pay attention to that foundation of health and wellness and movement and and whatnot. It's a forever thing. It will always be in my life and something that I need to focus on in terms of my health and disease process. And again, it's not unlike the experience that people have with addiction. It's something that's a continuous, everyday, forever thing that's paid attention to.
And I think that looking at it from an experience perspective, I think that that's what most people tend to forget is that call it positive, call it negative. I'm not a big fan of positive or negative experience. Experiences are experiences, and we can only grow from there. And you can have a bad experience with a person, a situation, or what have you. It's what you do with that experience that really pays off or not in the long term. So I appreciate your openness and thank you for that.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of my favorite sayings, right? You know very well, crisis is opportunity.
Yes, very much so. Like I said, that was experience I had. Sometimes it was received in a different way. But nowadays, I absolutely get it. And it's sometimes you got to age a little bit in order to really understand it. Mm-hmm. Well, Sarah, as we wrap up, we've been about an hour already. I'm going to link the Bulldogs. I'm going to link your website. Anything else that you want to share with people? Or
no, I appreciate the opportunity to reconnect with you on this level as well, Steve. I think it's really awesome. The work that you're doing in the podcast. I always catch them when I'm driving in the car and love that you're getting this out to our community, to the public.
I can't thank you enough, Sarah. And, I was in Plymouth not too long ago and I was like, seems weird to call Sarah and say, hey, I'm in Plymouth. And lo and behold, I text you for restaurants and you had some advice for me. So thank you for that.
Next time, let me know that you're going to be in the area. I would love to meet up.
I would love to meet up with you too. So thank you, Sarah. And I can't tell you how much this is going to help people, I hope, listening to this.
I hope so.
Well, that concludes episode 99 of Finding Your Way Through Therapy. Sarah Cloud, thank you not only as a person who was my supervisor, who I consider also a peer at this point. I also really appreciate our conversation. I thought it was amazing talking about substance use, talking about how to make things a little easier for those who are seeking treatment, particularly substance use. And I love the analogy to cancer treatment. But next episodes will be to celebrate my 100th episode. This is going to be the 100th episode, obviously, that I release every week, but there's going to be at least 3 more special episodes that week. And these are guests that I've been on before that I re-invited and I kind of mashed it up with other people. So I do hope that you come back and listen to that. And don't forget to go listen to the PsychCraft Network. I will link it in my show notes.
Please like, subscribe, and follow this podcast on your favorite platform. A glowing review is always helpful. And as a reminder, this podcast is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only. If you're struggling with a mental health or substance abuse issue, please reach out to a professional counselor for consultation. If you are in a mental health crisis, call 988 for assistance. This number is available in the United States.